The helicopter was ready. The clock was counting down. Everyone knew the rules. When the timer hit 0, you leave.
Keep still.
But somewhere
okay.
in the dark, a dog stopped walking. Not because he was lost.
I hear something.
Not because he was afraid. He was waiting for a doctor helping a wounded man who could barely stand. At the extraction point, a Navy SEAL looked at the empty seat. He didn't shout. He didn't order a search. He didn't move. He chose to wait. Because sometimes the mission isn't about leaving on time. It's about believing that someone is still on their way home. And sometimes, God sends the answer on 4 legs. Rex stopped. Not because of a sound that signaled danger, not because of a scent that warned of explosives or blood in fresh quantities, and not because a voice told him to halt. He stopped because the space behind him changed. The rhythm broke. The scrape of boots turned uneven. The breathing that followed no longer matched the pace of survival. The passage between the containers was narrow, metal walls rising on both sides like frozen waves, the darkness layered and dense, broken only by distant industrial lights that never quite reached the ground. The concrete was slick with old rain and oil, and every step echoed longer than it should have. Rex stood facing forward, body aligned with the invisible path ahead, muscles tight but controlled, a figure cut cleanly out of shadow. Behind him, the man stumbled. The sound was small, a shoe catching, a knee failing to lift. But small sounds were the ones that mattered most. The man's weight sagged suddenly, dragging the woman with him, and for a brief second she almost lost him. Almost. Her arm tightened around his shoulders, her other hand slammed flat against his chest to keep him upright, her boots sliding before she found purchase again. "Wait," she said. The word was not loud. It wasn't desperate. It was firm in the way commands become when they are stripped of all ceremony. She wasn't asking permission. She was stating a limit. Rex turned his head slightly, just enough to confirm what he already knew. The man's face was gray under the grime, jaw locked, eyes unfocused, but stubbornly open. His injured leg dragged uselessly, stiff and swollen, every movement sending a tremor through the rest of him. The woman's breath came fast, controlled by habit rather than hope. Rex lowered himself into a sit. The motion was slow, intentional. His nails clicked once against the concrete and then stopped. His posture said one thing clearly. He was not moving forward yet. His ears stayed upright, angled toward the corridor ahead, never backward. The way out still mattered, but so did the ones behind him. The woman shifted her grip, adjusting the man's weight against her body. She didn't look at Rex at first. Her eyes were on the ground, measuring distance, planning steps that her legs were no longer eager to take. She swallowed, took one breath, then another. "Okay," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. One more step. They moved again. The man's foot scraped forward an inch, then another. His breath rattled now, shallow and sharp, but he did not fall. He leaned into her, trusting her balance because he had nothing else left to trust. She absorbed the weight without complaint, shoulders tightening, jaw set. Rex stood and took 2 steps forward, then he stopped again. Not far, never far, always close enough that if they fell, he would still be there. The corridor seemed longer than it had a moment ago. The shadows pressed closer, the air colder, heavier. Somewhere far above, metal groaned as if the port itself were shifting in its sleep. Rex listened, filtered, dismissed the noise. Nothing here mattered more than the pace behind him. The woman exhaled through her teeth. "You're doing fine," she said quietly, the lie gentle and practiced. "Just keep your weight on me." The man gave a sound that might have been a laugh if he'd had more breath. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words barely audible. She didn't answer him. Apologies wasted air. They took another step. Rex moved again, guiding without pulling, leading without forcing. His presence was constant, a black and tan silhouette against the gray corridor, stopping often enough to make it clear this was not a race. This was a procession. At one point, the man faltered badly, his injured leg buckling completely. His weight crashed into the woman, and this time she staggered hard, nearly dropping to one knee. Her free hand slapped against the container wall, palm burning as she caught herself. "Hold on," she said, voice tighter now. Rex turned fully this time, stepping closer, his body angled between them and the darkness behind. He didn't touch them. He didn't need to. His stillness was a barrier all its own. The man's breathing broke apart into shallow gasps. His head dropped forward, chin to chest. "No," the woman said, sharper now. "Not here. Stay with me." She shifted her stance again, dragging his arm higher over her shoulder, ignoring the protest of her own muscles. Sweat ran down her temple, stinging her eyes. Her hands shook, but her grip did not loosen. Rex waited. The moment stretched. Time did strange things in places like this. Seconds grew weight. Every pause felt like a risk. Finally, the man straightened a fraction. He inhaled, slow and deliberate, forcing his lungs to cooperate. "I'm good," he lied. The woman didn't correct him. She just nodded once. Rex turned back toward the corridor and took 3 steps forward. They followed. The path curved slightly now, the containers opening just enough to let a thin ribbon of distant light slip through. It wasn't safety. It wasn't even close. But it was direction. The woman saw it and felt something loosen in her chest. Not hope. Something quieter. Orientation. "We're still moving," she said, as if saying it made it more real. The man didn't answer. His focus had narrowed to the sound of his own breath and the sensation of being upright. Each step was a negotiation between pain and will. Rex paused again, glancing back just long enough to confirm they were still there. They were. The woman looked at him then, really looked, meeting his eyes in the low light. There was no fear in her face, only exhaustion and a kind of grim gratitude. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. They moved on. The corridor behind them disappeared into darkness as if it had never existed. Ahead, the path remained uncertain, but present. Rex walked it with the steady confidence of someone who did not question the destination, only the pace. When the man stumbled again, Rex slowed without being told. When the woman had to stop, Rex stopped first. No signals, no explanations, just the understanding that there were only 2 choices left now. They went together, or they didn't go at all. Hours earlier, long before Rex stopped in the corridor to wait, the night at the port had carried a deceptive calm. Sodium lights cast long, pale reflections across wet concrete, and the cranes stood motionless like forgotten giants. The air smelled of salt, rust, and old fuel, a familiar blend that settled into clothes and skin. It was the kind of place that felt empty even when it was not, a place where silence hid rather than revealed. Rex had been released at the edge of the container yard just after midnight. He was a German shepherd in his 9th year, large but not bulky, his frame lean from constant work rather than age. His coat was black along the spine, fading into deep brown at the legs and chest, with the first signs of gray beginning to dust his muzzle. His eyes were dark and alert, carrying a steadiness that came from repetition and trust rather than excitement. Rex did not vibrate with nervous energy the way younger dogs did. He conserved himself. When his handler unclipped the lead and gave the brief command, Rex did not look back. He leaned forward immediately, as if the night itself had called his name. The mission assigned to him was deliberately simple. Search the port for signs of human life. Mark what you find. Return if possible. There were no speeches, no reassurance, no praise. Rex was used to that. He understood his role not as obedience, but as responsibility. Years earlier, during his first deployments, he had learned that hesitation cost lives. Since then, he moved with the quiet confidence of a creature that knew exactly why it existed in places like this. While Rex disappeared into the maze of containers, Ethan Walker remained at the extraction zone. Ethan was 42, tall and spare, with the posture of someone who rarely slouched even when exhausted. His dark brown hair was clipped short, silver beginning to show at the temples, and his face bore lines that came not from age alone, but from years of narrowing his expressions to what was necessary. His eyes were sharp, a pale gray that missed very little, and his movements were economical, never rushed, never wasted. He wore black tactical gear that had been repaired more than once, the fabric softened by use rather than neglect. Ethan had the reputation of being distant, but those who worked under him understood the truth. He was not cold. He was careful. Ethan watched the direction Rex had taken until the dog shape dissolved into shadow. He did not give additional instructions. He trusted Rex because trust was not optional in their line of work. Years ago, during an operation that had gone wrong, Ethan had learned the cost of second-guessing instinct. A delay, a moment of doubt, a man who never came home. Since then, Ethan believed in preparation and patience, in letting those assigned to move do exactly that. Waiting, he had learned, was sometimes the hardest and most important part of leadership. The briefing earlier that evening had been short and precise. The port was considered cleared. The objective was verification and withdrawal. There was no mention of civilians, no contingency for medical evacuation beyond the team itself. Such omissions were not unusual. Plans were built on probability, not possibility. Ethan had signed off on it without comment, aware that plans were promises made to the best information available, not guarantees. Still, a familiar unease lingered at the back of his mind, the kind that never fully disappeared once you had seen enough exceptions. Deep within the container yard, Rex adjusted his pace. Alone, he moved differently, his head lower, his attention spread wide. He ignored obvious paths, following instead a faint human scent that did not belong to recent movement. It was older, weaker, threaded with pain and exhaustion. Rex followed it patiently, weaving through tight spaces where metal walls closed in and sound behaved unpredictably. He was not rushed. He was thorough. This was not a chase. It was a search. Laura Bennett had not intended to be part of any mission that night. She was 38, of average height, with a sturdy, practical build shaped by long hospital shifts and years of lifting patients who could not help themselves. Her blonde hair, usually kept neat, was pulled back hastily, strands slipping loose and sticking to her damp skin. Her face showed signs of fatigue that no amount of composure could fully hide, dark circles beneath her eyes, her jaw set in a way that suggested endurance rather than anger. Laura was known among her colleagues as calm under pressure, someone who spoke gently but did not waver when decisions had to be made. That steadiness had been forged years earlier after a multi-vehicle accident early in her career where hesitation had cost a life. Since then, she had learned to act first and process later. She had found Tom Harris by accident. Tom was 54, a dock worker who had spent most of his life moving cargo heavier than his body now allowed. He was broad-shouldered, even injured, with hands thickened by decades of labor. His face was weathered, his hair thinning and streaked with gray, and his voice carried the roughness of someone used to shouting over machinery. When Laura found him, his right leg was badly injured, the swelling already pronounced, blood soaking through improvised bandages. He had tried to drag himself to safety, leaving a faint trail that Laura had followed instinctively. Tom's personality, even in pain, was stubbornly resilient. He apologized too often, joked when it hurt to breathe, and resisted being a burden with the same determination he once applied to his work. Laura had recognized that type immediately. Men like Tom were dangerous to themselves because they underestimated their limits. She had stayed with him because leaving was unthinkable, because her sense of duty did not distinguish between patients who belonged in plans and those who did not. When Rex found them, Laura's reaction was not fear, but recognition. She knew what he represented the moment she saw the harness, the controlled way he held himself. Her relief was immediate but restrained. She did not reach for him or speak loudly. She simply adjusted her hold on Tom and waited to see what the dog would do. Rex stepped closer, sniffed briefly, then settled near them, body angled outward, attention divided between their condition and the darkness around them. In that moment, Laura understood that he was not there to leave. At the extraction zone, the team completed final checks. A low murmur of voices carried across the concrete, punctuated by the distant thrum of engines. Ethan glanced at his watch, then away again. Time still allowed for Rex's return. He did not voice concern. Concern, he believed, was best handled quietly. When someone asked if the dog should have been back by now, Ethan answered simply that Rex knew his job. They moved away from the storage unit without ceremony, without checking behind them, because looking back had a way of convincing people to stop. The container yard stretched forward in narrow corridors and uneven turns, metal walls rising on both sides, pressing sound inward until every breath felt too loud. The ground was slick in places, unforgiving to anything less than careful balance, and the darkness ahead carried no promise except that it continued. Tom could not walk quickly. Each step required negotiation, his injured leg lagging behind the rest of him, forcing his body to compensate in awkward, exhausting ways. The effort showed in the tight set of his shoulders and the way his breathing shortened after only a few paces. Laura adjusted instinctively, shifting her grip without breaking stride, absorbing his weight in small increments rather than all at once. She moved with efficiency born of repetition, conserving strength the way others conserved ammunition. Rex led them a short distance ahead and stopped. He waited without tension, body angled forward, attention fixed on the path beyond. When they reached him, he continued. The rhythm established itself almost immediately. Advance, pause, regroup, continue. It was not fast, but it was steady, and steadiness was the only thing that mattered now. They passed through a stretch where the containers narrowed, forcing Laura to guide Tom sideways. Metal scraped fabric. The sound echoed longer than it should have. Rex froze instantly, ears forward, body low. He waited until the echo dissolved into nothing before moving again. The pause felt endless, but no one rushed it. Rushing assumed strength they did not have. Tom muttered something under his breath, an attempt at humor that dissolved halfway into a cough. Laura responded quietly, not with reassurance, but with instruction. She told him where to place his foot. She told him when to breathe. Her voice remained even, stripped of emotion, focused entirely on function. Emotion could come later, if there was a later. Rex shortened the distance he led after that. He stopped more often, sometimes after only a step or two. Each pause felt deliberate, as if he were recalibrating the space between what was possible and what was necessary. When Laura slowed, he slowed first. When Tom hesitated, Rex was already waiting. The yard shifted subtly as they moved, corridors opening and closing without pattern. In wider spaces, Rex angled them toward shadow rather than light. In tighter ones, he chose routes that required less maneuvering, even if they were longer. Distance meant nothing if it demanded more effort than they could give. Tom stumbled hard without warning. His injured leg buckled, and his weight collapsed sideways into Laura. She caught him, but could not stop both of them from dropping to one knee. The impact jarred her arm and sent a sharp pulse of pain through her shoulder. Tom groaned, the sound low and involuntary, his hands gripping her jacket as if it were the only stable thing left. Rex was beside them immediately. He positioned himself close, blocking the open space behind them, his presence firm and unmoving. He did not vocalize. He did not pace. He simply stood there, creating a boundary in the darkness. The message was unmistakable. This was a pause, not an end. Laura took a moment to steady herself, then shifted Tom's weight carefully, repositioning his leg with precise movements that avoided making things worse. She focused on his breathing, counting silently until it slowed enough to try again. When they stood, it was clumsy and painful, but it held. Rex stepped forward as soon as they were upright, resuming his role without hesitation. Progress slowed further after the fall. Rex reduced his lead to almost nothing now, sometimes stopping after a single step. He checked back more often, reading their movement as closely as the terrain. When Tom managed a steadier stride for a few seconds, Rex allowed a little more space. When Laura's movement stiffened, Rex closed the distance again. The adjustments were constant, subtle, and precise. Time lost its usual meaning. Minutes became sequences of action rather than measures. Step, stop, breathe. Adjust. Continue. Laura's awareness narrowed until there was room for nothing beyond Tom's balance and Rex's posture. Her arms trembled openly now, fatigue no longer something she could hide or ignore. She did not fight it. Fighting cost energy she did not have. Tom grew quieter as they went on. He saved his breath, speaking only when the pain spiked or when he needed to stop. He never asked Laura to leave him. The thought hovered in the air, heavy but unspoken. Laura was grateful for that silence. It allowed them to keep moving without confronting choices neither of them was willing to make. At one bend, the light ahead changed slightly. It was not brighter, just different, as if the space beyond widened enough to alter the air. Rex paused there longer than usual, letting them close the distance completely before moving again. Laura noticed the shift and felt something ease in her chest. Not relief, direction. Knowing that the path still existed mattered more than knowing where it led. They continued. Fear had burned itself out somewhere along the way. What remained was determination, practical and unromantic. Laura no longer wondered how far they had to go or whether anyone was waiting. She focused on what could be done now. One step, one breath, one pause. Rex embodied that logic perfectly, his patience absolute, his judgment steady. Walking, Laura realized, demanded more than surviving ever had. Survival had been instinctive, driven by adrenaline and refusal. Walking required acceptance of limits, the willingness to move slowly without surrendering. It required trust in a pace that felt inadequate, but was, in truth, the only sustainable one. Rex understood this without needing to be taught. He did not measure progress by distance. He measured it by continuity. As long as they were still moving, however slowly, the way out remained open. Ethan Walker stood at the edge of the extraction zone where the concrete widened just enough for a helicopter to settle without scraping steel. The space had been cleared earlier, containers pushed back to create a rough circle of openness that felt unnatural inside the port. Floodlights cut through the darkness at sharp angles, bleaching color from everything they touched. Beyond that circle, the night pressed in, thick and patient. The helicopter was already there, rotors still, crew moving with efficient restraint. Gear lay staged in clean lines, weapons checked and rechecked, motions precise enough to suggest confidence without carelessness. The countdown had started, though no one said it aloud. Everyone felt it in the way movements tightened, in the way glances drifted toward watches and instruments, and then away again. Ethan did not pace. He stood with his weight evenly distributed, boots planted, helmet hanging loose in one hand. His other hand rested near his vest, fingers relaxed rather than clenched. From the outside he looked calm, almost detached, but inside his attention was narrow and sharp, fixed on the absence that mattered most. Rex had not returned. That fact sat quietly in his mind, not as alarm, but as information. A younger operator nearby shifted his stance and glanced toward the dark corridors between the containers. He opened his mouth, hesitated, then spoke anyway. "We could send someone to check." Ethan did not answer immediately. He glanced at his watch, not to confirm the time, but to acknowledge it. The numbers glowed steadily back at him, indifferent. When he spoke, his voice was low and even. No? The word was not sharp. It was final. The operator nodded, accepting the answer without argument. He had worked with Ethan long enough to recognize the difference between refusal and consideration. This was not indecision. This was choice. Ethan turned his gaze back toward the darkness. He did not imagine Rex lost. He imagined Rex occupied. There was a distinction. Years earlier, on a mission that had ended badly, Ethan had learned what happened when leaders reacted too quickly to uncertainty. He had ordered movement where patience would have sufficed. The result had been confusion, overlap, and a man caught between plans that no longer aligned. That memory did not come to him as guilt anymore. It came as instruction. Waiting, Ethan knew, was not passive. Around him, the extraction zone continued to function. A crew chief moved along the helicopter's side, checking panels with practiced taps. A pilot leaned into the cockpit, running through systems, his face half-lit by instrument glow. Nearby, a woman in a communications vest monitored feeds on a rugged tablet, her posture alert but contained. Her name was Maya Collins. She was 29, slight in build, with dark hair pulled back into a tight knot that never came loose on shift. Her eyes were quick, always moving, absorbing information faster than she spoke it. Maya had joined coordination work after leaving a medical evacuation unit overseas, a transition shaped by one night when a delayed call had cost a patient his chance. Since then, she trusted data, but she listened closely to what data could not explain. Maya glanced at the tracking display again. 3 signals were moving slowly through the port. One of them was Rex. The other 2 were not marked assets. She frowned slightly, then smoothed her expression. She did not announce what she saw. She watched instead, tracking speed and direction, noting the irregular pace. Slow, stop, move, stop again. She looked toward Ethan. He did not look back, but she knew he was aware of her attention. Ethan had a way of sensing observation without reacting to it. It was not arrogance. It was discipline. "Time window is tightening," she said finally, keeping her voice neutral. "I know," Ethan replied. He did not add anything else. He did not ask for updates. He did not request confirmation. His silence was not ignorance. It was trust extended outward, a deliberate refusal to crowd a situation that required space. One of the crew glanced toward the helicopter's open door. The interior was ready, seats empty, a single space near the rear left unoccupied. That gap was obvious now, a physical manifestation of an expectation no one named. Gear had been arranged around it carefully, not filling it, not encroaching. The helicopter could lift without it. Everyone knew that. No one pretended otherwise. Ethan stepped closer to the aircraft, then stopped short of boarding. He rested one boot on the skid, testing the vibration as if it might tell him something useful. It told him only that the machine was eager to leave. He stepped back. The wind shifted slightly, carrying the distant sound of metal against metal, a faint echo from somewhere deep within the container yard. It could have been anything. It could have been nothing. Ethan did not move toward it. He did not lean forward or signal interest. He remained where he was, present but unhurried. Maya's screen updated again. The 3 signals had paused. She zoomed in slightly, adjusting parameters, filtering noise. The 2 unknowns clustered close to Rex. Their movement pattern was uneven, staggered, not running, not hiding, escorting. Maya exhaled slowly. She thought of the medic she had once been, of the frustration of waiting for clearance that never came fast enough. She thought of the cost of moving too soon and the cost of moving too late. Her jaw tightened, but her hands stayed steady. The crew chief approached Ethan, lowering his voice. "We're close to our limit." Ethan nodded. "Hold." The word carried weight, not urgency. Commitment. Minutes stretched, the kind of minutes that filled entire careers. No one spoke much now. The usual chatter faded, replaced by the low thrum of readiness held in check. Ethan remained still, eyes on the darkness, not searching for movement, simply acknowledging its presence. He trusted Rex not because Rex was infallible, but because Rex understood the task given to him. Find life. Do not abandon it. Ethan checked his watch again. The countdown ticked forward, numbers shrinking. He felt no spike of panic, no surge of adrenaline. Those reactions belonged to earlier versions of himself. This version understood that leadership sometimes meant creating room for others to arrive. Behind him, Maya made a small adjustment to the flight profile, subtle enough that it would not draw attention unless someone knew what to look for. She lowered the hover tolerance, buying seconds that could become minutes if needed. She did not announce the change. She trusted Ethan to notice without explanation. He did. Ethan allowed himself the faintest nod, not turning around. It was enough. The space on the helicopter remained empty. Wind stirred loose debris along the concrete. Somewhere out there, movement continued at a pace slower than any plan would allow. Ethan did not try to reconcile that discrepancy. He accepted it. Waiting, he knew, was not an absence of action. It was action chosen carefully. And as long as that space remained unfilled, as long as the night still held unanswered movement within it, Ethan Walker would stand where he was, eyes forward, hands steady, leaving room for those who were still finding their way out. The corridor narrowed fast, forcing them into a single line. Steel pressed close on both sides, swallowing light and sound. Rex slowed at once and shifted position, stepping slightly sideways, so his body filled the space between Laura, Tom, and whatever might come from behind. He did not look back. He did not hesitate. He simply became the barrier. A sound scraped through the darkness to their left, metal against metal. Not loud, not sudden. Wrong. Laura stopped mid-step. Tom followed, breath catching as his weight leaned forward. Rex moved one pace ahead and froze. He stood squarely in the corridor. No bark, no growl, just stillness, dense and deliberate. His posture closed the passage completely, turning the narrow way into a wall of muscle and certainty. Voices drifted closer, low and careless, then passed without stopping. Shadows slid across rusted steel and disappeared. Rex did not move until the sound was gone and the silence returned fully. Then he stepped forward. They followed. Rex chose tighter routes after that, slower but safer. He avoided open stretches, guiding them through turns that broke sight lines and muffled sound. When Tom's boot struck a loose panel and the echo rang too far, Rex halted instantly. They waited. The echo died. Rex moved again. The pattern held. Another obstacle stopped them. A broken section of walkway dipped unevenly, too steep for Tom to manage alone. Laura assessed it in seconds and shifted Tom sideways, guiding his good leg first. It was clumsy and slow. Tom trembled, balance slipping. Rex stepped in close. He pressed his shoulder lightly against Tom's leg, firm and steady. Not pushing, not pulling. Just there. Tom leaned into the support without thinking. They cleared the drop inch by inch. On the other side, Laura paused long enough to steady her breathing, then nodded once. Rex was already moving. A shape appeared ahead. A man, lean and uncertain, stopping when he saw Rex. His eyes flicked to Laura and Tom, then back to the dog. Rex stepped forward and stopped. Nothing else was needed. The man hesitated, calculated, then retreated into the shadows. Rex did not follow. He did not need to. The path reopened, and that was enough. They moved on. Tom faltered again, strength thinning fast. His injured leg shook, threatening another fall. Rex adjusted immediately, closing the gap, aligning his body with Tom's center of weight. Laura shifted with him. For a moment, the three of them formed a single structure, unsteady but intact. Then the tremor passed, and they continued. Rex kept his lead short now. 1 step, sometimes 2. He stopped often, waited longer, watched closely. He stood in doorways, at bends, at any place where danger could arrive faster than they could react. He did not fight the night. He managed it. Laura understood then. Rex was not clearing a path. He was holding it open. Every pause, every silent stand bought them seconds they could not create themselves. Movement continued because protection existed. By the time the corridor widened slightly, the threats had faded behind them, uninterested in pursuit. Rex paused once more, listening, then moved on without ceremony. As long as he stood between danger and those who could not stand alone, the way forward remained possible. The light appeared first as a pale shimmer, thin and uncertain, cutting across the metal edges ahead like a promise that refused to fully form. It pulsed once, then steadied, distant but unmistakable. Laura saw it and stopped without meaning to, her body reacting before her thoughts could catch up. The air seemed to shift with it, less compressed, less hostile, as if the port itself had loosened its grip. Tom noticed her pause and followed her gaze. His eyes narrowed, adjusting, then widened slightly. The light reflected faintly off the concrete, too clean, too controlled to belong to the yard. He swallowed hard. Hope rose before caution could stop it, then hesitated, caught between belief and experience. "You think," he began, then stopped, breath hitching. He tried again. "You think they're still there." Laura did not answer immediately. She had learned to treat distant rescue with respect. Too many times she had watched people break when what they thought was help turned out to be nothing more than reflection or memory. She tightened her grip on Tom's shoulder instead, grounding herself in what she could feel. The light remained. It did not flicker out. That mattered. Rex had already adjusted. He moved forward a few steps, then stopped, turning just enough to look back at them. His posture changed, not with urgency, but with intention. This was not caution now. This was confirmation. He lifted his head slightly and released a single, short bark. Not loud, not sharp, just enough to cut through the space between them. The sound settled something in Tom that words had failed to reach. Tom let out a breath he had been holding far too long. His shoulders sagged, not in collapse, but in surrender to the idea that the end might actually exist. "I don't hear anything," he said quietly, doubt creeping back in, even as the light held steady. What if they left? Rex did not bark again. He stepped forward and continued. Pace measured, lead short. The message had already been delivered. This path was still valid. That was all he needed to say. They moved toward the light slowly, every step dragging a little more than the last. Tom's injured leg burned constantly now, the pain no longer spiking, but flattening into something dull and consuming. It made concentration difficult, distorted his sense of distance. The light seemed closer than it was, retreating each time he thought they had gained on it. Laura felt her own limits pressing in. Her arms trembled openly, no longer responding to effort with anything resembling strength. She adjusted Tom's weight again, smaller shifts now, conserving what little stability remained. Her breathing had grown shallow, her focus narrowing dangerously. She recognized the signs. She had seen them in others countless times. Seeing them in herself felt strangely impersonal, like observing a patient she could not treat. Rex compensated without hesitation. He reduced his lead to almost nothing, stopping after every step, sometimes after half a step. He waited longer now, letting them settle fully before moving again. He watched Laura closely, eyes tracking the minute changes in her posture, the slight lag in her response time. He adjusted the rhythm accordingly. The space ahead widened gradually, corridors opening into a broader lane where the light grew stronger, clearer. The sound came with it then, faint but distinct, the low thrum of rotors cutting through the night. It was distant, restrained, but real. Tom heard it this time and closed his eyes briefly, as if bracing himself against disappointment. "They won't wait," he said, the words slipping out unfiltered. "They never do." Laura said his name sharply, not unkind, but firm enough to pull him back. "Not now," she said. "Focus." Her tone carried more strain than she intended, but Tom nodded, chastened. He took another step, then another, each one slower than the last. His balance wavered, the fatigue now undeniable. Rex stopped and shifted position, pressing closer, aligning himself so that if Tom fell, he would fall into something solid. The rotors grew louder. The light flared brighter, spilling across the concrete ahead, bleaching rust and grime into harsh contrast. The extraction zone was still out of sight, hidden by a final curve of containers, but its presence was undeniable now. Laura felt a strange mix of relief and fear, relief that they had not imagined it, fear that they would not reach it in time. Tom's doubt returned stronger this time. "They won't see us," he muttered. "Not like this. We're too slow." Rex stopped abruptly and turned to face him fully. He looked up at Tom, dark eyes steady, ears forward. He released another short bark, sharper than the first, carrying unmistakable intent. Then he turned back toward the light and moved on. Tom stared after him, then let out a shaky laugh that dissolved into a breathless cough. "All right," he said hoarsely. "All right, I'm coming." They rounded the bend. The extraction zone came into view, wide and stark, the helicopter hovering low, its lights washing the concrete in blinding white. Figures moved within the glare, silhouettes sharp and purposeful. The sound of the rotors vibrated through Tom's chest, through Laura's bones. It was overwhelming, disorienting, but undeniably real. Laura felt her knees threaten to buckle. The sudden shift from darkness to light stole what little composure she had left. She forced herself to keep moving, to not stop now, not this close. Tom's weight sagged heavily into her, his strength finally giving way under the promise of rest. Rex adjusted again, stepping closer, positioning himself between Tom and the open space ahead, blocking the rush of movement and noise. He slowed them deliberately, preventing a collapse that might come from trying to move too fast, too suddenly. He understood the danger of the finish as well as the journey. The helicopter did not lift. It stayed where it was, rotors beating the air into submission, lights fixed on the ground. No one rushed forward yet. No one shouted commands. The space held, open and waiting. Tom noticed that detail even through his exhaustion. His grip tightened on Laura's sleeve. "They're still there," he whispered, disbelief softening his voice. Laura nodded once, unable to speak. Her throat tightened, emotion threatening to break the careful control she had maintained for so long. She focused on Rex instead, on the steady line of his back as he guided them forward, unhurried, certain. They crossed the edge of the light. The noise surged, wind tearing at clothes and hair, forcing Laura to lean harder into Tom. Rex stopped just inside the illuminated zone and turned back to look at them, checking, confirming. He released one final bark, louder than before, not alarm but announcement. They had arrived. The clock in the control room did not tick loudly, but Maya Collins felt every second of it. Time showed itself in other ways here, in the tightening of shoulders, in the way voices shortened, in the glances that drifted toward the countdown and then away again, as if looking too long might make it move faster. Screens filled the space in front of her, maps layered with data, signals sliding across grids that tried to make movement look orderly. One cluster moved wrong. Maya leaned closer, fingers still, eyes narrowing. 3 signals advanced toward the extraction zone at a pace that did not match the plan. Stop, start, stop again. The pattern was irregular, hesitant, human. One of them she recognized immediately. Rex. The others were untagged, unaccounted for, never meant to exist on this screen. Movement slow, someone behind her said, half observation, half concern. Maya did not answer. She adjusted the feed instead, filtering noise, sharpening contrast. The signals held. They were still moving, just not fast enough for comfort. The helicopter hovered low outside, its presence felt even through the reinforced walls of the control room. Rotors beat the air into a steady roar that vibrated through metal and bone alike. Pilots waited on restrained power, ready to lift at the word. The word had not come yet. Maya glanced at the countdown. Too close. Protocol offered clean solutions. Clean solutions rarely fit real situations. She knew that better than most. Years earlier, she had learned how final a missed window could be. She had learned what it felt like to follow procedure perfectly and still watch someone disappear from the edge of the map. That memory never raised its voice. It didn't have to. It stayed present, shaping her decisions quietly. She looked toward the extraction feed. Ethan Walker stood just outside the helicopter, unmoving. He was not pacing. He was not arguing. He was waiting, a deliberate stillness amid the churn of readiness. Maya watched him for a moment longer than necessary. He had not asked for updates. He had not asked her to do anything at all. That told her everything. "Fuel margin?" she asked, voice even. The pilot answered without hesitation. "Tight, but workable." Maya nodded once. She did not announce her next action. She made it small instead, the kind of adjustment that disappeared inside a larger system. She lowered the hover tolerance by a fraction, recalculated the flight envelope, shifted the buffer. Seconds became more flexible. Risk redistributed itself quietly. The helicopter stayed where it was. No one objected. They trusted her, or at least they trusted the machine to complain if she went too far. It did not. Maya's eyes returned to the slow-moving cluster. The signals paused again, then advanced. Stop. Start. The pace spoke of injury, of exhaustion, of determination stretched thin but unbroken. She imagined what that looked like on the ground and dismissed the image just as quickly. Imagination could distract. Data was enough. "Any reason to launch now?" someone asked, not challenging, just checking. Maya shook her head. "They're coming." She did not specify who. Outside, the helicopter's lights washed the concrete in hard white, carving shadows that shifted with every movement of the blades. Ethan remained just beyond the open door, one boot planted on the ground, helmet still in his hand. He checked his watch, then lifted his gaze back toward the dark corridors of the port. The space beside him inside the aircraft stayed empty, an unspoken insistence made physical. The countdown slid closer to its limit. Maya felt the pressure rise, sharp and familiar. This was the point where indecision pretended to be caution, and caution threatened to become failure. She tightened her focus, narrowing the world back down to what mattered. 3 signals, 1 path, 1 decision. The feed flickered as the cluster crossed into a brighter zone. The pace slowed again. Maya's jaw tightened. She leaned forward as if proximity might help. "Hold," she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. The pilot glanced back at her, reading her posture. He nodded once and kept the helicopter steady, resisting the instinct to lift. The rotors maintained their rhythm, beating time without consuming it. On the ground, Ethan felt the shift before he saw it. The helicopter did not climb. It did not drift. It waited. He allowed himself a breath that did not quite become relief. He did not turn around to acknowledge Maya. He knew she had made the choice. He also knew she would not need thanks for it. The control room remained tense but controlled. No alarms sounded, No warnings flared. The system accepted the adjustment as if it had always been there. Maya watched the cluster advance into the outer edge of the light. The signals tightened, converging. She zoomed in again, just enough to confirm what she already suspected. They were close now. Close enough that lifting early would mean leaving something behind. Close enough that waiting a little longer could change everything. "Almost," someone murmured. Maya said nothing. Seconds stretched. The countdown brushed its threshold and slid past it without triggering anything catastrophic. The margin thinned, then held. The helicopter remained, lights fixed, rotors steady. The night did not collapse because they asked it not to. Maya felt a strange calm settle over her. Not confidence, acceptance. Whatever happened next would happen because they had chosen to allow it. The cluster reached the boundary of the extraction zone. Maya exhaled slowly. "That's them," she said, her voice level. On the ground, movement emerged from the glare, slow and uneven, but unmistakably human. Ethan straightened slightly, attention sharpening without urgency. He did not step forward yet. He waited, holding the line he had drawn without words. In the control room, Maya released the adjustment she had been holding, easing the system back toward normal parameters now that the need had passed. She did not smile. Satisfaction came later, if at all. For now, it was enough to know she had not moved too soon. The helicopter stayed. The line held, and the space they had protected long enough was no longer empty. Rex appeared first. He stepped out of the darkness into the hard white light of the extraction zone without hesitation, coat dusted with grime, ears forward, posture steady. The roar of the rotors did not slow him. Wind tore at his fur, flattened it against muscle and bone, but he moved as if the noise belonged to him, as if this was simply another environment he had already measured and accepted. He crossed the edge of the light and stopped, turning his head back toward the corridor he had come from. Ethan Walker saw him immediately. He did not move forward. He did not call out. His shoulders eased by a fraction, nothing more. The space he had left inside the helicopter remained open. Rex stood within the light, unmoving, waiting. Then Laura emerged. She came slowly, one step at a time, her arm locked under Tom's shoulder, her body angled to keep him upright against the force of the wind. The sudden brightness washed the color from her face, made the exhaustion impossible to hide. Her hair whipped loose around her eyes, her jaw clenched against the strain she had been holding back for hours. Tom leaned heavily into her, his injured leg dragging, boots scraping across the concrete, as if the ground itself were trying to keep him. The noise hit them hard. The rotors drowned out everything else, reduced speech to useless movement of mouths. Laura squinted against the light, blinking rapidly, disoriented by the sudden openness after so much confinement. Tom's grip tightened instinctively, his fingers digging into her sleeve as if afraid the wind might pull him backward. Rex did not rush them. He stepped forward only when they reached him, placing himself just ahead, body angled to break the wind, slowing their approach so the transition would not overwhelm them. He moved 2 steps, then stopped. Laura and Tom followed. 2 more steps. Stop again. The rhythm held even here. Ethan watched the count change. 1, 2, 3. He did not count bodies out of habit. He counted because counting was how he confirmed reality. When Rex stopped again and looked back, Ethan saw the alignment clearly. Dog, doctor, civilian. No one missing. No one left behind in shadow. Ethan gave a single nod. That was the signal. Crew members moved immediately, efficient and silent despite the noise. A medic approached Laura and Tom, hands out, guiding them the last few steps toward the helicopter. Laura resisted for half a second, instinct refusing to let go, then released Tom's weight carefully into trained arms. The relief hit her all at once, violent and disorienting. Her knees buckled, and she dropped to one knee without ceremony, breath shuddering as her body finally acknowledged how close to empty She had come. Tom was lowered onto a stretcher, his face pale but conscious. He looked back toward Laura, tried to speak, failed, then lifted one hand weakly in something that might have been thanks. She nodded once, unable to trust her voice. The medic shouted something she could not hear and wheeled Tom toward the open door. Rex remained where he was. He stood just inside the light, watching until Tom was secured, until Laura was guided away from the rotor wash and toward the side of the aircraft. Only then did he move, padding forward with the same calm precision that had carried him through the port. He leapt lightly into the helicopter and turned, positioning himself near the open space Ethan had left untouched. Ethan stepped aboard last. He did not look around to make sure. He already knew. He paused just inside the doorway, one hand gripping the frame as the wind tore past him, and scanned the scene once more. Laura was seated on the floor, back against the interior wall, head bowed, eyes closed. Tom was strapped in, oxygen mask in place, chest rising and falling steadily. Rex sat alert but relaxed, eyes tracking Ethan's movement. All present. Ethan nodded again, this time to the crew chief. The door slid shut. The sound changed instantly, the chaos of the rotors muting into a contained roar. The helicopter lifted smoothly, the ground dropping away in a controlled retreat rather than a desperate escape. The port receded beneath them, light shrinking, corridors collapsing back into anonymity. No one spoke for a long moment. Laura leaned her head back against the wall and let her eyes close fully. Her hands shook now that they were free, fingers curling and uncurling without command. She laughed once, softly, the sound breaking apart halfway through as tears followed without warning. She did not try to stop them. She did not need to. Tom watched the ceiling, the tension slowly draining from his face. "I didn't think," he said hoarsely, then stopped, breath hitching. He tried again. "I didn't think anyone would wait." Ethan did not answer right away. He removed his helmet and set it aside, then looked across the cabin at Tom. "We did," he said simply. Rex shifted, standing and stepping closer to Tom's stretcher. He rested his head briefly against the edge, a quiet acknowledgement, then settled back down. Tom's hand drifted toward him, fingers brushing fur with a reverence usually reserved for miracles. Laura watched the exchange through blurred vision. She shook her head slowly, a smile tugging weakly at her mouth. "Figures," she murmured. "The one who listens best doesn't even speak." Ethan allowed himself a small exhale. Outside, the helicopter climbed higher, angling away from the port toward open air and distance. The city lights spread beneath them, orderly and indifferent, unaware of the small victory that had just slipped through its margins. No one debriefed, no one summarized what had happened. They did not need to. The mission had not changed on paper. The extraction window had not expanded. The plan had not been rewritten. What had changed was simpler and harder to quantify. Everyone was accounted for. Ethan leaned back into his seat, eyes closing briefly. The familiar weight settled over him, not exhaustion exactly, but completion. He had learned over the years that success did not always arrive with celebration. Sometimes it arrived quietly, disguised as absence, the absence of loss, the absence of regret. Rex lay down near his feet, head on paws, finally allowing himself stillness. The job was done. Not because a timer said so, because the count had reached its true end. The helicopter flew on. Behind them, the port returned to silence, its corridors empty once more. Ahead, the night opened into something wider, something that did not demand vigilance every second. No one had been left behind. No one had been sent searching into the dark. Because some lives, guided patiently and without noise, found their way home on their own. Sometimes the miracle is not fire from the sky. Sometimes it is a quiet decision made in the dark. In this story, no one forced the rescue. No one ran in shouting orders. A man waited, a woman endured, and a dog listened. That is often how God works in our lives. Not always through loud answers, not always through sudden change, but through patience, through courage that keeps moving one step at a time, through hearts that refuse to leave someone behind. The world tells us that time matters more than people. God reminds us that people are the reason time exists at all. In your daily life, you may feel like Tom, slow, wounded, afraid that help has already left, or like Laura, tired, carrying more than you think you can, or like Ethan, waiting, trusting, holding the line when it would be easier to walk away. And sometimes God sends a guide, not always a person with answers, sometimes just a quiet presence that says, keep going. There is still a way home. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment and tell us what part spoke to you. Subscribe to the channel so more stories like this can reach those who are waiting in the dark. And if you believe, type Amen in the comments. Let it be a prayer for strength, for patience, for the courage to wait and the faith to walk forward. May God bless you. May He guide your steps. And may no one who watches this feel left behind.